In South Africa, the prevalence of overweight and obesity is high. In 2018, diabetes was the second leading cause of death in the country. We talk about the Health Promotion Levy. The World Health Organization says that overconsumption of sugar is a major contributor to obesity and diabetes. Liquid sugar is known to be particularly harmful. One single sugary drink has about 40 grams of free sugar. This is equivalent to 10 teaspoons of sugar. In 2018, the government introduced the Health Promotion Levy, also known as the Sugar Drinks Tax. Treasury's initial proposal was to introduce a tax equivalent to 20% of the price of a litre of the most consumed sugar-sweetened beverages. After continuous efforts to protect and strengthen the levy, public health advocates had high hopes that in his 2022 budget speech, the finance minister would follow through on his commitment to increase it. Following industry submission challenging the potential increase, government announced a 2-year moratorium. Health economists are concerned that the impact of the levy is weakening year on year. Since its introduction 6 years ago, it has not been adjusted to keep up with inflation. For years, different players in the sugar industry have made claims that it would shed thousands of jobs. Has the sugar industry been lying to us all this time? And does the sugar industry care as much about its workers as it proclaims?
When things are good for business, that doesn't necessarily mean it's beneficial for the people in the ecosystem of those corporations.
You know, NEDLAC had a document presented to them about job losses. And when we went to investigate this document, we couldn't find out who the authors were. It was not peer-reviewed. And yet, NEDLAC took this document as valid.
The disaster is not the Health Promotion Levy, it's the corruption and greed.
On our show, we have Sue Goldstein from Priceless, Eunice Karim, a former parliamentarian, and Michael Marchant from Open Secrets. Sue, as a former doctor and now public health policy researcher, you've seen firsthand the absolute devastating impact that we see diabetes have on our society. Talk to us about why a health promotion levy is effective.
Well, the most important thing that you can think about the health promotion levy is that what we are taxing is something that's completely unnecessary. There's no nutritional value in these sugary beverages, and it's wasted calories, and it's really been shown to increase the rate of obesity and thus diabetes, not just diabetes, hypertension, cancers, a whole range of other illnesses, in fact.
And the health promotion levy is proven to be effective.
It has been shown. It's not in other countries very well shown. In South Africa, we haven't had it at a high enough level to be that effective. We have shown some effectiveness. And studies that we did quite soon after the introduction showed that there was a decrease in access of these sugary beverages, especially amongst the lower income people, but also higher income people. So I think it is working, but it should be working better.
Eunice, you are an insider, and you had a front row seat into all the kind of debates. Talk to us about some of the deliberations and discussions you had around when the health levy was introduced to Parliament.
Well, firstly, it was some time in coming. We were made aware every now and then by the Treasury's Deputy Director General, Momanyat, that it was coming. There was extensive discussion with industry, the unions, NGOs, and so on. HELA was involved. And so they brought the bill to us in 2017. We worked with the Portfolio Committee on Health and jointly processed the bill. The most of us supported, across the two committees, a 20% increase. I think it was recommended by the WHO at the time. However, while we respect the views of health experts and NGOs dealing with the matter and took their views fully into account, there were competing interests that were just as important in some respects. We were concerned about emerging African farmers, but particularly COSATU and SAFTU's Food and Allied Workers Union put a lot of pressure on us to defend jobs. So we had to balance the needs of the health sector, the country's public health system, workers, particularly African workers, but all workers, and also the needs and interests of NGOs. So that's the balance we sought. And
It's not just NGOs. I mean, let's be frank
policy
here.
experts, okay, the people who wanted it.
It's the population. So the needs of the population are people. I mean, we've got an obesity rate of 30%, and the needs, yes. The thing about what you're saying, and I hear you, is that the industry has this playbook. And the biggest thing that they do is they say
Yes,
it's
but
jobs.
this presupposes, as do you, Christel, which is wrong.
So,
You presuppose we were only concerned about industry. No. We're concerned about workers, particularly African workers who came there and African farmers. So we make no apology for seeking consensus. For the first time ever, a bill was taken to NEDLAC to encourage consensus. No tax bill was taken. To my knowledge, no tax bill. Treasury opposed it. Yeah. The minister contacted me, said it's never been done before. It's opening the floodgates. And we set a precedent. In principle, we agreed with 20%. But having listened, you see, the NGOs and public experts, in general, they focus solely on a particular area, right?
I think that's
and what
unfair.
usually happens, in general, I'm not speaking about you in particular, in general, that's the case. And they do not consider there are other competing needs and interests of poor people, disadvantaged people. And frankly, that was the best we could get in those circumstances. What happens subsequently is not for MPs alone to decide. It's for the public to campaign, like you are doing it, Hila, to take to the streets and put more pressure.
But Michael, you looked at Tongaat Hewlett, I mean, one of our big companies in South Africa, the biggest accounting scandal that we've seen. Talk to us about this investigation and what you found.
You know, Tongaat Hewlett, one of the largest sugar producers in the country, and along with Steinhoff, probably one of the two largest corporate frauds of South Africa's recent history. We came to the story through the auditors. We were interested in the fact that Deloitte was the auditor for both firms, and that was our entry point. You know what, and I say we've discovered, this has also been uncovered by subsequent criminal investigation and a forensic investigation by Tongaat, is that there was systematic fraud at that company for about a decade. And I think it goes to a very interesting point, you know, what Eunice has said, is that there's always a response from industry that shows a concern about jobs and about industry. In this case, if you look at a company like Tongaat Hewlett, the systematic fraud by executives there with the connivance of auditors and others arguably has presented a much greater threat to farmers, to jobs in KwaZulu-Natal, to shareholders, creditors, which includes the Government Employees Pension Fund, a far greater impact than via the sugar tax. You know, there are efforts now to hold those individuals accountable. The CEO, the former CFO, one of the Deloitte auditors, they have all been charged with racketeering, and that case will likely go to court either at the end of this year or early next year.
You know, NEDLAC had a document presented to them about job losses. And when we went to investigate this document, we couldn't find out who the authors were. It was not peer-reviewed. And yet, NEDLAC took this document as valid compared to the work that we'd been doing, which is peer-reviewed. It's very clearly open, transparent. And I just think that we need to be thinking about what is happening there and what representation civil society has at NEDLAC, including academia.
Okay.
The bill that came to us, we supported it. Actually, it's the DA that was ambiguous about it, actually, because they were representing the interests of big business. And we had issues within our own ranks for people who are connected to big business. That's the ANC. It's always been there, and it's been worse since then. So what I'm saying is, as political activists, we're not just politicians, we have long histories of struggle. The primary concern was the population of this country, which doesn't just mean the obesity issue. It also means employment. It also means tackling the white-controlled sugar industry and so on. What he is saying, Michael, is exactly what went through my mind when I first read in the media, look at Tongaat Hulet's.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what horrible things the industry was doing? They were canvassing people at the highest levels. They were offering all sorts of inducement to MPs. I had to confront them and say, I'm going to expose them in the media. The reply I got was, yes, but you know who's going to get exposed? Not us. We're just doing what we do all over the world.
Wow.
It's you people. It's your leaders.
We've actually traveled to KwaZulu-Natal, to northern KwaZulu-Natal, and spent some time with two farmers. Let's have a look at their stories.
Njengomlimi wesifazane kuningi okungigqugquzelayo ama-challenges angigqugquzelayo but ngiyabheka ukuthi amathuba omsebenzi awekho but ngiyabona ukuthi kwi-farming kuyaphileka.
Ngingumlimi osalima ngokuncane onesifiso sokulima agcine engumlimi omkhulu. Izikhona ingqinamba umobeni akulula. Into enzinyana nje ukuthi uma ubulima ngamandla akho awujwayele ukuthola amafanda abantu ezokufanda ngemali. Manje uyabiza siuthola ekudeni because njengami nje nguthola ophongolo. Ukonke okwenzayo kusuka kuwena. Bese kuphinde kube isigaba sokuthatha uyise emshinini. Kuyingcindezi enkulu because umshini wethu ungaphezulu ka 220 kilometers ukuya kuwona. Imali eningi ithatheka i-transport.
Umoba wami-ke ngiwusa imile engifaka kuyo uphongolo. Unama-truck esiwahayarishile ahambisa umoba. Mina ngine-cane loader eyami engiyithenge ngemali yebhizinisi lami. Iyona elayishayo-ke nabanye komakhelwane bayangiqasha ukuthi ngibalayishele umoba. Transport ngicharge 290 per ton, not per load, per ton, cause i-truck isuke ilayishe 32 ton or less than. So-ke uma ungabala uthi 32 times 290, usuyabona ukuthi load limalini. Uma une-tuck shop yakho, udayisa isinkwa, uwena oshoyo ukuthi isinkwa siwu-18 rand, but akubi ibhaya eshoyo ukuthi lesinkwa siwu-18 rand, but thina umshini ositshelayo ukuthi iprice kashukela ithi.
Eunice, I'll start with you. Your reaction to just seeing the absolute hard work of farmers like Sandile, labor-intensive and very little money. I mean, how do we try to protect small-scale farmers like Sandile?
Interestingly, that was one of our key considerations. It's on the eve of the 2019 end of term of Parliament, 2018. There was a rush of bills in finance. We were unable to follow up on those things. That was only a foundation for an incremental increase in the health promotion levy. And I agree with Sue. It's gone nowhere near as far as it should. And I agree with Mark. The disaster is not the health promotion levy, it's the corruption and greed of those people in Tongaat Hulet's.
So there, Michael, it's not Mark, Michael.
Sorry, Michael, sorry.
You've now heard the kind of insider politics, you've heard the health aspect, you've seen the realities. Clearly polar opposites, right?
Absolutely. I mean, my first response when you watch that video is also this recognition that the sugar industry in South Africa, Tongaat Hulet's a great example, its very premise was dispossession. I mean, these were colonial enterprises, both Tongaat and Hulet, who were granted all of that land in the 1850s. And so their foundation was a crime, the crime of colonialism. And for Tongaat Hulet then, 150 years later, to be brought down by criminal activity within a boardroom, I think there's this kind of, I guess, interesting and disturbing symmetry. I think what Eunice is saying in particular, which is really so striking and something to take away, is that we do have this knowledge that this is the playbook, as Sue describes it, of large corporations both in South Africa and elsewhere. And I think once we have that understanding that corporations will talk one way, represent the interests, for example, of small-scale farmers, and yet now the business rescue practitioners of Tongaat Hulett are fighting tooth and nail not to pay a 1.1 billion rand levy that company owes in terms of the Sugar Act, which would go, amongst others, to small-scale farmers. That shows the interests that they purport to protect and the ones that they genuinely pursue, which unfortunately are usually the shareholders rather than anyone else.
The thing that struck me about this video was that the barriers are not just the sugar industry. For example, what's happened to railway in this country? Why are they paying these exorbitant amounts for transport? Who owns these trucks? I mean, for me, that's another whole area that you guys need to investigate. So I think that's the one thing. And the other point is that if you're sugar farming, which happens around the world, there are other things you can do with sugar. It's not just about pouring it into food. You can use it for energy. You can do all sorts of other things with it. So government needs to look at those aspects of it and saying, okay, how do we support these guys and get the industry leaders in jail, in my view. But not cut the SSB tax, because we're looking at the health of South Africans, thousands, millions of South Africans.
So, of course, we saw the plight of small-scale farmers, but there's also workers. And we met a worker, Siboniso, and it's really tough out there. But let's have a look.
Ngizalele khona kule ndawo ibizwa ngokuthiwa kwaJobe. So ngikhulele khona la, ngifunde ey'koleni zakhona la. So after sengiphumile-ke esikoleni, impilo ike yathi ukuthi ngishayashaya. Mangisekhaya babhizi nginaka iy'nkomo kamkhulu, imbuzi kamkhulu. So nasengadini nje, ingadi kamama ngilekelela umama. Njengoba ngisebenza nje impilo ngizama ngokusebenza emasimini, kuye kube nzima because ufuna uvuke. Njengoba kusebusika nje uvuka ekuseni ngabo-4 ngabo-5, akukho lula, kunzima. And sometimes isikhathi sihambe ngeenyawo emasimini, sidinga ukuthi sihayikhe ngayo nale mali engekho esizamayo. Kube nzima, mhlawumbe ngelinye ilanga ngihamba uyobuya lishonile ilanga ngabo-7, ilanga buya ntambama maybe ngabo-5. So isikhathi sezinye izinto nokuthi mhlawumbe ukwazi ukuxhumana nabanye abantu abangathatha bakubeke kwenye i-level ngokwempilo, sigcine sesisincane. Umsebenzi engiyaye ngiyenze esasiyenza emasimini, mina especially mina-ke, umsebenzi nje engiwenzayo kakhulu ngisebenzisa ugandaganda. Ngisebenzisa ugandaganda, ngiyalima ngogandaganda, ngikwazi ukudweba imisele, ngiphinde ngigqibe ngogandaganda. Hhayi eminye imisebenzi ngoba akuyona imisebenzi enzima ekhona emasimini. Ngiyayenza ngaleyo langa uma ngabe ungekho lo msebenzi lokuthi mhlawumbe namhlanje siyalima, namhlanje siyatshala, mhlawumbe namhlanje kuyaye kwenze mhlawumbe kuyagawulwa, siyagawula umoba, mhlawumbe kuyenzeka ngelinye ilanga mhlawumbe kuyatshalwa mhlawumbe ezinye izinto, mhlawumbe ummbila, amaklabishi, ngiyakhona nakhona ukwenza njalo ukuthi sitshale. Mhlawumbe siyaheshe emasimini kungcolile kunesikhotha, but ocelemba siyahesha. Ezinye zengqinamba esibhekana nazo uma ngabe sibhizi sisebenza. Sometimes ilanga liyashisa ilanga, kuyasiphoqa ukuthi sisebenze elangeni, lokho kusikhozela ezinye izinkinga emzimbeni, ukugula, uphathwe izifo khona lapha emubeni, izifo oy'thola khona lapha ensimini ngoba kuhamba uhlobo lwey'lwanyana lapha emasimini. Kuyenzeka mhlawumbe uthi uyasebenza nakhuya usulimele, mhlawumbe ugencile, mhlawumbe besisebenza ngogandaganda, mhlawumbe nakhuya awunawo amabhuzu enyaweni, so banjwe insimbi uhlephukile enyaweni ulimele. So kube nzima futhi nokuthi uzoya kanjani emtholampilo, nomtholampilo ikude. Ngokwamaholo angeke ngize ngisho ukuthi kuhamba kahle, kuyabheda. Umuntu uyabamba ngoba senzela ukuphila, ngisho njalo senzela ukuphila. Lokho esikutholayo kuncane kakhulu kuncane kakhulu ngoba sometimes ngelilanga uyaye uphume ngo-5 uphume ngo-5 wasekuseni uzobuya ngo-5 ntambama noma ngo-6 late ntambama kodwa at the end of the day ubuya namalini sometimes ubuya nabo-90 rand abo-100 rand imali engekho ngeke uziwenze lutho ngaleyo. Yes.
So, I mean, back-breaking work, long hours. It's absolutely just devastating listening to Mboniso's story. So how ultimately do you think the HPL can benefit workers?
Well, everybody will benefit from the HPL. I just want to mention that even today, Business Day had a RCL profit declaration. And the reason that they're doing so well is because sugar is doing so well. And yet the industry are telling us that they're losing jobs and they're struggling and they're not managing. But here, it's obviously they're doing fine. They're doing fine off the back of these laborers.
What we saw there, it's an indictment not just on the industry, but all of us, NGOs, professionals, but primarily the ANC, the party I come from, that it's allowed to continue. But it's interesting that those people that are in that situation would, against the most difficult conditions, prefer to have a job than not have a job. What's again glaring is neither the Department of Agriculture, nor the Finance Department, nor indeed the Trade and Industry Department, nor indeed the Department of Health are doing their work.
We've spoken about this from the beginning, this notion that in the lobbying phase, you've got companies saying this is about jobs. And now we see in this documentary the nature of some of the jobs that we're talking about and the industry's interest in that. South Africa needs much stronger regulation of lobbying in general. We now, for the first time in the last few years, have party funding legislation. So we know, in some instances, if they disclose it, where political parties are receiving funding. And that's one thing. But we don't know whether it's the sugar lobby, the fossil fuel lobby. We have very little information about the meetings they have with senior officials and the way in which they're able to dedicate resources to capturing various parts of our politics. And I think that's also of massive concern.
Is it time for us to start from government side ring-fencing money?
Now, on that score, Treasury has a rigid policy on this. And it draws a whole lot of technical parallels throughout the world why ring fencing is an issue. They use this example, for example, that the Unemployment Insurance Fund at that time, this is pre-COVID, had a huge surplus. The Road Accident Fund, on the other hand, has a huge deficit. But you can't transfer from UIF to the RAF. So what they said is, if you restrict it solely to the health sector, the revenue you secure, you will set a precedent again. We've stopped it, and globally the thinking is, it may be neoliberal, it may be IMF and World Bank, but we couldn't summon to our aid. We don't have the capacity to present a counter-argument, so we settled for that.
I think that this is what we've been told by Treasury over and over again. And when it was introduced, the HPL, there was a little bit of money that was given to Department of Health for health promotion. And they didn't know what to do with it. And they gave some of it back. And the point is, for me, is that in many countries, including Thailand, including Indonesia, there are things called health promotion foundations which promote health to try and stop disease before it affects them. And my argument around, particularly now with the NHI will never work unless we prevent illness. We're on a trajectory with obesity that's going to take us, we'll never be able to provide those services, no matter how much money we get from the private sector.
So final thoughts, Eunice, we have a new cabinet, we have a not so new minister, but we have lots of new ministers. Are you feeling confident, optimistic that there's going to be some shifts and changes?
It's too early to say. And I think ultimately, I keep saying, it doesn't depend just on parliamentarians. Civil society, academics, the widest range of social strata have to come to the fore and put pressure on the GNU. If you want the national health system to work, the NHI, then you have to insert into the NHI matters like this, attending to obesity and so on. But finally, what we're saying, I think, in different ways is the weakness of our state. If NEDLAC worked, if Parliament worked. Now, for example, Sue says they had the money, they didn't know what to do with it. After 5-6 years of preparing to come to Parliament and over 2 years of processing in Parliament, 1 year in particular, they should have given the money to HeLa or to all these Priceless or to academics, right? Not just to produce research, but to help to implement the policies and the bill and so on that we passed, which is an act. So let's not fold our arms. Let's march. I will march with you. As I told them when I exited Parliament, I said to them, no, I'll still be here.
There you heard Yunus saying he will march with you.
Yes, with HeLa.
The medium-term budget is also obviously coming up. Are you feeling optimistic?
Not really, unfortunately. I'm thinking, I mean, one of the issues for me is that the Government of National Unity has positives and negatives. And one of the negatives, I think, is that many of the new parliamentarians are very industry-friendly. And I think that is going to shift it even more towards blocking the HPL. I mean, there are other positives, but so I'm not sure.
But you can use Yunus's insider views.
I will march too.
No, but also there are other people who are progressive. They're not big mouths. So, it's a matter of reaching out to them. And they cut across parties.
Yeah, that's true.
So, Michael, you've now heard the marches are going to happen. I'm sure you're going to join us. Are you feeling optimistic?
I think cautiously optimistic. I think one of the positives that might come from a government of national unity is will it create space to really entrench the independence of regulatory bodies and independent law enforcement. We shouldn't forget that in a case like this, whether the former Tongaat executives and the auditors from Deloitte are convicted is not up to politicians. It's up to the prosecuting authority to do their jobs and the Hawks to properly investigate. We, in recent history, have a terrible track record of those because those institutions have been so undermined. And so will this new era create a possibility for that? I think there is some hope. But, and the pessimism from me comes really with the point that Sue has made, which is that the concern around the government of national unity is this message that if we make things in the country business-friendly enough, everything else will just fall into place, right? We attract investment, for example, and we get industry back on its feet, and everything will be fine. That doesn't answer the accountability problem, for one, and it doesn't, as we've seen in the documentary inserts there, it doesn't answer the justice problem.
You should bring COSATU here, because they lobbied like mad. What are they doing? Workers are their priority. What are they doing since they came to Parliament?
We need accountability, and there you have it. There is a need to increase the levy, and it's not causing job losses. There's also a need to protect policy from industry influence. It's crucial for the government to prioritize the health of its citizens over corporate greed when making decisions about taxation policies. It's even more important that government protects us from profit-driven industry opposition to policies that are proven to save lives. Since 2018, in the lead-up to nearly every budget speech and midterm budget policy statement, there's been a call to increase the health promotion levy to 20%. Sign the petition to protect and increase the health promotion levy on HeLa.org.